open, gasping. After my hot ride down the valley, the shade of the big tree was very grateful, and the cool trade wind coming through a gap in the hills most refreshing. Suddenly there was a flash. We all waked up. Was that the house owner? What a remarkable bird, and what a display of color! It had a red head, fiery in the sun, a black back, and a vivid yellow breast. On looking it up in Ridgway, the stranger proved to be the Louisiana tanager, a high mountain bird. That was a red-letter day for me. No one can know, without experiencing it, the delight of such discoveries. The pleasure is as genuine as if the world were made anew for you. In the excitement, the oriole's nest was neglected, but ordinarily the rare unknown birds did not detract from the enjoyment of the old, more familiar ones. So when the brilliant stranger flew away and was seen no more, I turned with pleasure to the pair of sparrowhawks who had come to live on the ranch. A branch had fallen from one of the trees, and the hawks found its hollow just suited to their needs. It was a good, spacious house, but a pair of their cousins who had built in a tree over the whitewashed hovel had made a sad mistake in choosing their dwelling, for the front door was so small they could hardly enter. I used to stop to watch them, and was very much amused at their efforts to make the best of it. Canello could stand up to his knees in alpha-Larry clover under their tree, so he allowed me to watch the birds in peace. The first day the male sparrowhawk flew to the tree with what looked like a snake dangling from his bill, and as he alighted, screamed, "Kit, kit, caw!" spreading his wings and shaking them with emphasis. When this brought no response, he flew from branch to branch, crying out lustily. He revolved around the end of a broken limb, in whose small hollow was framed the head of Madame Falco. From her height she looked like a rag doll at her window. Her funny round face, which filled the doorway, had black spots for bill and eyes, and dark lines down the cheeks that might have simulated rag doll tattooing. Evidently there was some reason why she did not want to come to breakfast. Once she started to turn back into the nest, but at last laboriously wedged her way out of the hole and flew to a branch. Her mate was at her side in an instant and handed her the snake. She took it greedily and flew off with it, let us hope because she was afraid of me, not because she did not want to divide with him, or thought he would ask her to, after all his devotion and patience. When the bird went back to her nest, her hesitation about leaving it was explained. For a long time she sat on a limb near by with tail bobbing, apparently trying to make up her mind to go in. When she did fly up at the hole, she could not get in and half fell down. After this failure she sat down on a branch, her tail tilting as violently as a pipit's, and when Canello moved around too much, took the excuse and flew off. Her mate came back with her, but when he saw us, he screamed and flew away, leaving her to her fate. She sat looking at her hole a long time before she tried it again, and when she did try, failed. It was not till her fourth attempt that she succeeded. The hole was very much too small for her, and the surface of the branch below it was so smooth and slippery that it gave her nothing to hold on to in trying to wedge herself in. She would fly against the hole and attempt to hook her bill over the edge, and so draw herself up, but her shoulders were too big for the space. She tried to make them smaller by drawing down her wings lengthwise. Once in her efforts she spread her tail like a fan. After her third struggle she sat for a long time smoothing her ruffled feathers, shaking herself, scratching her face with her foot, and trying to get her plumes in order. While making her toilet, she apparently thought of a new plan. She went back to the hole, and raising her claw, fastened it inside the hole and with a spasmodic effort wedged in her body and disappeared down the black hollow. Her mate came a moment after, but she did not even appear in the doorway when he called. Again he came, crying "Keek, keek, kicker" in tender falsetto, but it was no use. Madame Falco had had altogether too hard a time getting in to go out again in a hurry. He held a worm in his bill till he was tired, changed it to his claw, letting it dangle from that for a while, and then, as she would make no sign, finally flew off. The next day we had another session with the sparrowhawk. She had evidently profited by experience. She did not fly at the hole in the violent way she had done the day before, but ambled along a limb to get as close to it as possible, and then quietly flew up. She made 2 or 3 unsuccessful attempts to enter, but kept at the branch, falling back but once. She got halfway in once or twice, but could not force her wings through. She acted as if determined not to give up, and at last, when she found herself falling backwards, with a desperate effort drew herself in. There was another sparrowhawk family across the road from my ranch. In riding by one day, I saw a youngster looking out from the nest hole with big, frightened eyes. Was it the only child, or was it monopolizing the fresh air while its brothers were smothering below? Another day there were two heads in the window. One was the round, domed top of a fluffy nestling whose eyes expressed only vague fear, but the other was the strongly marked head of an old sparrowhawk, who eyed us with keen intelligence. As I stared up, the young one drew back into the hole behind its parent, probably in obedience to her command, and the old bird bent such an anxious, inquiring gaze upon me that I took the hint and rode away to save the poor mother worry. These were not the only hawks of the valley. Once, seeing one of the large buteos winging its way with nesting sticks hanging from its claws, I turned Canello into the field after it, following till it lit in the top of a high sycamore. The pair were both gathering material. Sometimes they flew with the twigs in their claws, sometimes in their bills. Now they would fly directly to the nest, again circle around the tree before alighting. When one was at work, the other sometimes flew up and soared so high in the sky he looked no larger than a sparrowhawk. In swooping to the ground suddenly, the hawks would hollow in their backs, stick up their tails, drop their legs for ballast, and so let themselves come to earth. While one of the birds was peacefully gathering sticks, two blackbirds attacked it, apparently on general grounds, because it belonged to a family that had been traduced since history began. To tell the honest truth, I trembled a little myself at thought of what might happen to some of my small tenants, though I reassured myself by remembering that the facts proved the maligned hawks much more likely to eat gophers than birds. In the back of the stub occupied by one of the sparrowhawks, it was a pleasure to find a flicker excavating its nest. Planting its claws firmly in the hole with tail braced against the bark, the bird leaned forward, thrusting its head in over and again, as if feeding young. It used its feet as a pivot, and swung itself in farther and farther as it worked. Such gymnastics took strong feet, for the bird raised itself by them each time. It worked like an automatic toy wound up for the performance. When tired, the flicker hopped up on a branch and vented its feelings by shouting "if, if, 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 if," after which it quietly returned to its work. The wood was so soft that the excavating made almost no noise, but it was easy to see what was going on, for the carpenter simply drew back its head and tossed out the glistening chips for all the world to see. At the end of a week, the flicker was working so far down in its excavation that only the tip of its tail stuck out of the door. The nest of another Colaptes I found by accident. A fresh chip dropped from midair upon my riding skirt. Just then Canello gave a stentorian sneeze, and the bird came to her window to look down. She did not object to us, and was loath to turn back inside the dark hole, such a close, stuffy place, when outside there were the rich green leaves of the tree, the sweet breath of the hayfield, and the gentle breeze just springing up, all the warmth and sunshine and fragrance of the fields. How could she ever leave to go below? Perhaps she bethought her that soon the dark hole would be a home ringing with the voices of her little ones. At all events, she quickly turned and disappeared in her nest. At the foot of the ranch I discovered a comical, sleepy little brown owl, dozing in a sycamore window. When we waked it up, it went backing down the hole. I wondered if it kept awake all day without food, for surely owl children do not get many meals by daylight. I spoke to the ranchman's son about it, and he said he thought the old birds fed the young too much, that he had found about a dozen small kangaroo rats and mice in their holes. He told me that he had known old owls to change places in the daytime, and both birds to stay in the hole during the day. Down the valley where an old well was only partly covered over, at different times he had found a number of drowned owls. They seemed to fly into any dark hole that offered. 3 barn owls had been taken from a windmill tank in the neighborhood in about a month. In a mine at Escondido, the man had found a number of owls sitting in a crevice where the earth had caved, and he had seen about a dozen of them 50 to 100 feet underground at the bottom of the mine shaft. I did not wonder the birds wanted to keep out of sight in the daytime, knowing what happened to those that stayed out. A pair nested in the top of a high sycamore on my neighbor's premises, and when one stirred away from home, it did so to its sorrow. One morning there was such a commotion, I rode down to see what was the matter. a big dark brown form